formally challenged the results of this month's presidential election at the Supreme Court. Well, the Nairobi Stock Exchange NSE shed 43 billion shillings to close trading at 2.3 trillion, the lowest level since Kenyans went to the polls on August 9th. It could be weeks before a new president is sworn in, escalating a political contest that has thrown investors into uncertainty. The shilling also dipped to a new low against the dollar to trade at 119.75 cents, having depreciated from 113.13 cents at the start of the year and 104.44 cents at the end of March 2020. Well, my colleague Kelvin Ogega spoke to Eric Musau, one of the analysts. Let's have that conversation.
Let's look at the NSE shedding 43 billion shillings to close at 2.23 trillion. What does this mean to a normal consumer in the country?
So if you think about the loss in shareholder value, and maybe giving just an example, if a share reduces by 1 shilling and then the company has 1 billion shares, so that loss for that one company is a billion shillings, and you add up all the companies, some have gained, some have lost, and of course that loss you're referring to, the 43 billion, is essentially the market declined, and that is the total loss in the market. And the impact can be far-reaching. I mean, if you think about who invests in the stock market, your pensions invest in the stock market. If you're a direct shareholder in the market, you're actually losing money. And yet the businesses fundamentally are doing reasonably well. In fact, we are looking at valuations, they're almost as low as they've been in over 15 years. So really a challenging period for the market.
And can we say that the election period has affected the markets really?
It does seem to have made some contribution, but I think also there were global drivers. So there were tailwinds from the global market, especially higher interest rates, which started off with the US starting to raise interest rates, supply chain issues this year. So we started off with COVID, started having interest rates to address the inflation issue, and this year is supply chain issues. They are easing, but certainly a key concern. Yeah, and those have been the ones which have also affected the market. The companies themselves mostly have done reasonably well. They are quite resilient. We've seen the banks announcing this week and part of last week. The numbers are quite solid. They have some challenges, but reasonably the valuations, we've seen multiples being very attractive for investors. But the confidence is really what is lacking. Yeah.
Now, when we look at the performance from Monday up to where we are now, and then shedding such a huge amount, what effect did the presentation of the case to the Supreme Court have on maybe investors, on the business environment in the country?
It's really part of that uncertainty that kind of gets baked in, because at the point where you now have a petition formally placed at the Supreme Court, you're really looking maybe at another 2 weeks or 3 weeks of uncertainty, and the outcome, the markets don't really know the outcome of what that could be. So that uncertainty in a way gets priced in through lower prices, because if we end up in a scenario where we end up in a prolonged electoral cycle, then that could be a concern to the economy and to business planning, and that could be negative overall for business.
And let's move over to the shilling and how it has been performing. In January this year, we were at 113.13 shillings against the dollar. And right now we are at 119.75. So as it has been performing, what are we looking at in the coming months before we close the year?
I think one of the things when you look at the shilling is to also look at the other currencies. So for example, the pound, the euro, which are also important trading partners. So globally, the dollar has been strengthening because the economy in the US, the employment is really high, very little unemployment. The economy is doing really well. They're able to raise interest rates without affecting their currency, and when they raise interest rates, people take money into that country because it's much safer. They're getting a higher return. So the shilling, while a lot of focus has been on the US dollar exchange rate, when you compare us with, let's say, the pound or the euro, the Kenyan shilling has actually strengthened against those currencies, and those are also major trading partners. So if you think about the farmer who's exporting their tea or flowers, and these are key markets. Europe is a key market for us. We've seen that the return is not as high. So there's that concern about the currency, but in itself, even a weakening is not necessarily bad. But I think in this particular case, we are looking at just one key market, which is a major driver of global economy, being the one which is dragging the currency.
And at one time, are we seeing the currency coming back? At least we maybe go back to 90, because there are years when we were at 80 shillings against the dollar, 90 against the dollar. What are some of the factors that maybe can bring it back to that place, or are we in a place where we can't go back?
Kelvin, it's a tough question, and hopefully the politicians, when they settle the matters, they'll be able to sort of address this issue.
Yes.
There are many challenges. Currency is not the only component in an economy. At the end of the day, you're looking at disposable income, and on a macro basis, if you want your currency to be strong, you need the economy to be strong. We need to focus more on exports. We need to have the service industry growing. If it's IT, we should be selling our products. Our brands should be going global. At the moment, a big part of our economy is a trading economy. We're importing a lot of stuff. If you're importing a lot of stuff, it means we need to buy more dollars from the market in order to get all these things that we're importing. So for you to really build a solid economy, you need to look at what are these things that we can do. How do you strengthen the agricultural sector? How do you strengthen your services industry? How do you ensure that the Kenyan companies that we have are spreading their wings out there and being able to bring back money, dollars, pounds, and so forth. And at the end of the day, it's that momentum, along with the diaspora, being able to talk to the diaspora so that they're able to invest back money into the country. That's really what's going to drive a strong economy. But a strong currency, especially with the high unemployment, is really not sustainable, because at the end of the day, people talk about challenges on the cost of food or and so forth, but really at the base of it is really disposable income. The salaries are not high enough. The businesses are not performing robustly enough to employ more people. So at the end of the day, one has to, the policymakers have to look at that and try and see how do the currency shouldn't be the main focus. It's really being able to get the economy working. If people have high disposable income, the rest will work itself out. The exchange rate is just kind of a neutral adjustment to the reality of what is happening in the economy. Yes.
All right. So even as we come to a close, the NSE, someone might ask, the NSE shedding, the shilling weakening, how does this affect me as a consumer who goes to the shop, buys unga, buys sugar, buys salt? How does this affect me? Why do I need to know this?
If you think about the stock exchange, and especially if it is well diversified, it's really supposed to be the heartbeat of the economy. Because companies in the market, if maybe to use the example of Safaricom, if it knows that Safaricom, when you talk about airtime, the customers are you and me, and maybe the corporates who are buying the internet and so forth. At the end of the day, the profitability of those businesses, which eventually feed into returns, for example, of our retirements. That's one of the key drivers, and the upside, because at the end of the day also you're looking at savings rate of the economy. You can be borrowing, but at the end of the day you also need to invest and save. So that's usually one of the key drivers. If you're a business, you want to grow. Today you have a kiosk, tomorrow it might be a supermarket. You might want to list in the stock market to be able to raise capital, in order to grow across Kenya, across East Africa. And that's usually equities or shares are not the only instrument. You have fixed income, which means, for example, government uses the market to raise capital or money to be able to build roads, to pay salaries in some cases. So the market does a lot of things and ensures that capital is allocated efficiently. And that's where we are to really ensure that that works out. But it's always a journey, and we hope it can play a much bigger role. In places like the US, and we're talking about a strength of the US economy, if you think about every month, or you have like 2 or 3 IPOs in the technology space, those are companies which are raising capital, expanding and growing globally. If our market is not doing that and raising sufficient capital in the market and creating jobs, it means at the end of the day the trickle-down impact in terms of employment will actually be visible, and we'll really never get out of that circle. So the market is quite important, especially if harnessed for the strength that it provides.
All right, many thanks there, Kelvin, for that insightful interview. And we also carry on with our weekly panel here. Today we have Ken Gishinga, Chief Economist, Mentor Economics, to just continue to unpack for us this very important subject. And Ken, great to see you after a short hiatus. But looking at the recent developments through the week, we've seen members of parliament being oriented. We've also seen county governors and their deputies being sworn into office. 45 governors already sworn in, 2 of course pending, Kakamega and Mombasa. But from your viewpoint, what should really characterize the next, say, 100 days of the governors?
Many thanks for having me, Abby, and it's good to be back. Indeed, yesterday we saw 45 administrations being sworn in, and the first 100 days will be quite critical. I think the issue of raising revenue, the own source revenue, that has to be number one. And I think that can only happen through digitization. How do they put up a good digital mechanism in terms of being able to raise revenue? Think of Nairobi County, the issue of digitizing parking fees has been there for a long time, but it's never been implemented, because you can't do anything if you don't have revenue. So I think the revenue generation model will be very critical.
So, of course, we've seen governors from central Kenya saying that they'll be giving a lot of focus on the agricultural sectors. Governors as well as for Nairobi, Sakaja, who is very keen on ensuring that he restores good governance to the capital city, being Nairobi. And we've also seen governors from the western side of Kenya talking about really building the economic blocks in terms of boosting their competitiveness. And governors are literally key in the whole agenda of devolution. When you talk of resources reaching the common man and woman on the ground, counties will be facing a very interesting financial year. And one of the big conversations is as governors, of course, take charge of the administrations, big issues are around resource distribution and resource utilization.
Absolutely. I've always said devolution is a game changer, and the ability of the governor, number one, to inspire confidence, and number two, to be able to deploy those resources effectively, I think will be a critical factor on how they perform. I wish we can get to a place where at least once a year the governors can be giving, the way the president gives the State of the Nation address, we can have a State of the County. So at least we're able to understand what progress has been made, what are the plans. They do have what they call the annual development plans, but it's important that they are communicated. I think in the first 100 days, the communications team must be very clear so that everybody is on the same page. Number two, getting the sectors that have a competitive advantage. As you've said, agriculture in the central area has a big competitive advantage. How do you link those to the private sector? So I think the governors will do well are those ones who are innovative, those ones who think out of the box, are those ones who manage the wage bill, because one of the temptation is to try and out of political promises, bring everybody who helped in the campaign into the administration, and that you make your wage bill very bloated. So being able to have fiscal discipline, I think, will also help quite well.
And of course, looking at the big cities, Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, and now Nakuru, what should really be the priority for these governors, considering that these are not just your typical counties, these are now city status. And of course, one of the big conversations is how the national cake is distributed. We know that 15% of national revenue is meant to go to the counties, and county governors have been struggling, saying the amount of money we are receiving is not enough, and thus a huge chunk of the money coming in is going towards recurrent expenditure instead of development expenditure.
Well, I think Mombasa on their side, because they're still yet to have the elections, but the other big cities, Nairobi, Nakuru, Kisumu, they have the capacity to raise significant revenue. In fact, I've even argued Nairobi can collect up to 80 billion. If you only look at things such as land rates, which is highly untapped, if you look at the parking fees, those ones are very quick wins, but you do need to have a digital architecture, and that's what the work of what the CS of lands was doing in terms of digitizing the lands registry. That helps you be able to be more efficient in revenue collection. So then those big cities can earn enough to the point where they actually, the allocation from the national government should be quite minimal. The greatest allocation should be to those counties that have no capacity to raise their own revenue. But Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, there's so much wealth in this city, but it's never really tapped to. So I think the person who can get digitization right, because digitization is what creates a framework, I think they'll be the people who will do very well.
And digitization, of course, will cause an upset in some of these counties because human contact will be eliminated.
Yeah, like the digitization of the parking fees, I think that's always been a very political hot potato, because that revenue is quite huge. But if everybody can be convinced that if you digitize parking fees, all the revenue goes to the county officials are able to be paid on time, because one of the challenges is their salaries are always delayed. So if you can show the county officials, if you can collect revenue efficiently, you'll get your salaries on time, even they become part of the solution as opposed to being part of the challenge. I think that will be one of the key things they'll be able to do.
All right. A lot to expect even as governors settle in and the dust continues to settle for the various counties across the country. Well, I want to take you to the Milimani law courts briefly to just get a feel of what's happening at this hour. We continue to monitor developments from that end. The legal team literally waiting for the final feedback before they can prepare for the pre-trial hearing that will be kick-starting next week on Monday. And those are live pictures from Milimani law courts here in Nairobi, Kenya, where various the legal team representing Kenya Kwanza will be making a fight back on the petition that has been filed by the Azimio brigade. Interesting times indeed. We shall definitely be giving you more updates when we come back from this quick break. BBC Money Daily coming up next.